From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The Biden administration is asking the Supreme Court to take an expedited look at its student loan forgiveness write-off program that recently got a beatdown at the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. Plus, later, we'll chat about the University of North Carolina's new school on civic life and why that new program has ruffled so many feathers in Chapel Hill. Welcome to Potomac Watch. I'm Kate Batchelder-Odell, filling in as your host today, and I'm joined first by my talented colleague, Alicia Finley, editorial board member and columnist. Alicia, thanks for joining us today to walk us through the latest judicial rebuke the Biden administration received on its student loan plan. I saw the Biden administration is asking the Supreme Court for a quick consideration of lifting this ruling. Let's walk through a little bit about what the Biden administration was trying to do here. We know they lost at the Supreme Court a year ago when they tried to cancel $10,000 to $20,000 of debt for each borrower. They seem to have tweaked the idea somewhat, and now they're using the income-based repayment plan. Those are the plans that the Education Department has run for some time that allow borrowers to repay based on their earnings over a set period of time. But this looks like a pretty different program that the Biden administration is trying to run. They are bringing monthly payments down to 5% of discretionary income, down from 10%, and it's on less of your income. It's now only on income above the 225% of the poverty level, and borrowers don't have to pay accrued interest. Alicia, this strikes me as a pretty large policy shift that the administration has little to justify as a matter of law. So why don't you walk us through who sued and what did the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals have to say about this Biden gambit?
So I just find these income-based repayment plans, especially the Biden administration instituted last summer after the Supreme Court struck down its $10,000 to $20,000 in a sweeping loan forgiveness, these plans to be completely outrageous. Under these plans, you pretty well outlined it. You only have to pay 5% of your discretionary income, and that's defined as, again, above 225% the poverty line, with $32,000. And then you get your loans forgiven after 10 years if you are a public servant. So if you work for the government or some kind of nonprofit, the Sierra Club, among others. And the administration even said that under these plans, more than 4 million people wouldn't have to pay a penny. So people who are earning less than $32,000 would not have to pay a penny toward their loans, and then they could get them forgiven after 10 to 20 years. In fact, the administration even was encouraging people to use their savings, which are just gigantic, and put them and invest them in the stock market, and said that, well, after 10 to 20 years, if you, by not paying your student loans, you can actually net $100,000, which is just incredible. But some Republican states sued and challenged these SAVE plans that they rolled out, claimed that, one, these are not authorized by the Higher Education Act, which is actually what the administration invoked, or the law that was invoked. And the district court, there were actually 2 district courts that actually blocked various components of these plans, one being the debt forgiveness plan, and the other district court blocked the 5% and other repayment provisions, though that ruling was actually stayed by the 10th Circuit. Now, the states went back and actually asked for the entirety of the SAVE plan to be blocked, not just the debt forgiveness provision, because what the Biden administration started doing was actually just forgiving loans in violation of the district court's injunction here. And the way they did this is they used the Obama repayment plans. And these were actually specifically established by Democrats in the Affordable Care Act in 2010, and those provided 10% of discretionary income payments and forgiveness of loans after, again, 10 to 20 years. And they said, well, hey, all these people who enroll these SAVE plans, well, for the purposes of the payment or the 5%, they can continue to do that. But for the other purposes of the debt forgiveness, we're going to combine these rules. And while the judge blocked this in the SAVE, they didn't block this in the Obama plan, so we're just going to combine these rules. And it's like, what? And the 8th Circuit just skewered the Biden administration for doing this, basically turning the district court's injunction into a nullity. So now that the entirety of the SAVE plan is now on hold, but get this, the administration has now said to everyone who is in these SAVE plans that they don't have to pay their loans anyways. We're just going to put an administrative forbearance. So don't worry about paying your student loans anyways.
Wonderful. I mean, the lawlessness here over the past couple of years is really hard to grasp. And I think an obvious point is that Donald Trump would not be getting the same treatment if he were doing the same thing. But I do want to ask Alicia about this appeal the Biden administration has filed at the Supreme Court. The court obviously didn't look favorably on the first Biden gambit to forgive student loans. What is the administration arguing justifies this supposed emergency? And does the court have any reason to dance to its tune and look favorably on it? Or what should we expect it not to succeed?
So when the courts consider whether to impose injunctions or to lift injunctions to stay them, they consider the merits, but they also consider the balance of equities here. And the administration argues that the balance of equities, the benefits of its plan exceed the harms that would be done to states. And because the states that are suing this gets into kind of a wonky and abstruse questions concerning standing with the student loan servicers and how much would they actually be harmed, the state servicers, Mohila in particular. But they're basically saying, well, they're really not going to lose or any money if these provisions continue to go into effect, while the students or the borrowers will be harmed. Who cares about if they don't or if they are paused? Who cares about any of the taxpayers? Because, of course, the taxpayers don't matter. Right? Sure. I don't think any of this is very persuasive. And I think the Supreme Court actually said in the decision last year with regards to the $10,000 to $20,000 in loan forgiveness that these aren't apples to oranges or apples to apples comparison. You can't actually compare these equities. And in fact, there would be irreparable harm done if these are allowed to go into effect and the administration is allowed to continue to write off debt, because once you write it off, once you forgive the debt, there's no way to undo that, right? And so I think that they're not going to weigh in. There's really no reason for the Supreme Court justices to weigh in right now and overrule the Eighth Circuit and really to get into this political thicket, so to speak, because the question also could end up being settled by the election if Donald Trump wins, because presumably he'd roll these plans back.
We'll talk more about that question on The Politics right after the break. Welcome back to Potomac Watch. I'm Kate Batchelder-Odell, and I'm chatting with my colleague, editorial board member, and columnist Alicia Finley. We're talking about the Biden administration's student loan plan, which continues to take beatdown after beatdown in court as they try to write off loans to win votes ahead of the election. So, Alicia, I want to talk a little bit about the politics of all of this. And one question I have is, what does Kamala Harris think about student loan forgiveness? I think the entire country is trying to figure out to what extent there is any daylight between her and Biden. Is there any reason to think if she's elected, she would do anything different from what Biden has done, or should we expect more of the same egregious lawlessness in pursuit of writing off these loans to taxpayers?
There's no reason to expect that she would do anything different. She has supported the administration at every step of the way. But interestingly, when she ran for president in 2019, she actually supported increased loan forgiveness for minorities, which of course is now would be completely unconstitutional. But putting that aside, she and Biden and the people who would work under her, James Kavall at the Education Department, I mean, there's a whole coterie of progressives who are pushing this that are part of the administration, and I think would be holdovers, and they would continue to do this. And of course, there is the election imperative that they're trying to win votes. But there's no reason to think that they wouldn't actually continue with this, especially as now they are billing this loan forgiveness as an economic stimulus that we need to help and forgive and cancel this debt, because otherwise these poor borrowers who have taken on more debt than they should have to get degrees that really are worthless in many cases, that we need to help them in order so they can afford homes, and otherwise the housing market is going to struggle, and all these parade of horribles, other justifications. And I would actually expect Harris might actually expand the loan forgiveness if she can get away with it. The administration has even acknowledged that there's nothing in the law that would necessarily prevent them from forgiving all debt under these loan repayment plans by setting the share of income that they must pay at 0%. So this is actually how the administration views this. And even if Harris hasn't gone outright and endorsed this, she has basically been complicit in it.
Right. Alicia, this seems like a no-brainer of an issue for Donald Trump, even just on the basic fairness argument of what the Biden administration is doing. We know how many student loans are concentrated in graduate degrees and law schools and master's degrees, not just undergraduate debt. And there is a basic fairness argument to the idea that, for instance, if you got into a variety of colleges and you chose one that was not as prestigious as another or elite, but allowed you to attend at a lower cost to take out fewer loans or no loans, and you graduated and you paid back whatever you owed, and suddenly you find out that you really didn't need to do that at all, that there was going to be this huge student loan jubilee at the expense of the taxpayer. This seems like something Donald Trump should be talking about on the campaign trail. Have we heard anything from him about it? Do you think it will be a theme that his Vice President Vance will discuss? What do you expect out of the Trump campaign on this? It's
perplexing that Donald Trump hasn't raised this and made more of an issue of it. Again, this really does get to kind of a class warfare and an unfairness theme. You pointed to the graduate programs, and yes, disproportionately all these loan forgiveness plans disproportionately benefit people who have gone to graduate school, whether it's to get law degrees or masters in fine arts, journalism. We could do a whole segment on that and how those don't pay off in any kind of respect. But these loan forgiveness, it's disproportionately benefiting people who have gone to college, and among those who have gotten advanced degrees and are actually earning and making quite good money.
A good point. Lastly, Alicia, I guess we'll talk a little bit on the substance. I mean, these student loan write-offs, we know that the Biden administration has written off over $100 billion in student loans, maybe even higher. Correct me if you have a better estimate. But eventually, the bill for this is going to come due. Republicans in Congress purport to care about fiscal issues. I wanted to ask briefly, expecting Donald Trump to get into the policy weeds on this is probably a bit of a tall order. But what would you be advising Republicans in Congress to propose or start to do to drive at this problem of this just accruing debt forgiveness, while also trying to get some kind of hold on the continuation of this debt being taken out at such high levels? I mean, we hear kind of get arguments about taxing college endowments, but I don't think those are realistic. They're maybe politically salient, but not necessarily realistic. What would you advise as sort of a first step from an off-ramp from just this huge debt balance sheet that the taxpayers are accumulating?
Well, first thing is, let's get the government out of the graduate student loan program, which is driving almost all of the increase in student debt at this point. It's not really the undergraduate programs, it's the graduate programs, and that's because there's no cap on how much the education department can loan to graduate students, while there is actually one for undergraduates. So getting that out, banks have actually been pushing this idea because they'd like actually to be able to do these loans, but they can't compete with the government, which heavily subsidizes them. And there's no reason why the government should be subsidizing people to go to law school or get MBAs and such. And so that's a very low-hanging fruit. Another idea, though, I think this may be a bigger climb, would be to put colleges on the hook for loans that don't get repaid. And increasingly, a lot of the debt isn't getting repaid, almost 40 to 50% in some of these programs. And to put them on the hook, the Biden administration has interestingly tried to do that for quote-unquote for-profit colleges, but has given a dispensation for public and nonprofits.